In the words of legendary Spinal Tap lead vocalist David St. Hubbins, it's a fine line between stupid and clever. And for the legendary band AC/DC, the line is even thinner between tragedy and megastardom. In this feature, we are back in black with a story of sudden loss, serendipity, and the making of one of the greatest tribute songs ever recorded, with interviews next on Professor of Rock. Hey music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. If you remember the ritual, of listening to a new album on vinyl, or if you still do that, you're going to love this channel. We celebrate the greatest of all time. Just subscribe below right now to get the stories from and about your favorite rock era artists. Also make sure to check us out on Patreon for even more content and more engagement. Helps this channel keep going and be a daily channel. So when brothers Malcolm and Angus Young formed AC/DC in 1973, believe it or not, the group was labeled as glam rock, largely because of the onstage persona of their original lead singer, Del Evans. The glam rock image did nothing to distinguish AC/DC from other bands who were working the same circuit in Australia in the early 70s. However, the fiery showmanship of the Young brothers left an impression on anyone who saw one of those early AC/DC shows. To the concert promoters in Australia, what the band really needed to do was get rid of their lead singer and really get a new frontman. So that's exactly what they did. Malcolm and Angus hired a new manager named Michael Browning to help navigate their pivotal transition. Already on the outs with the rest of the band, Evans got into a physical altercation with Browning after an AC/DC show and was officially fired. Enter Ronald Belford Scott, a journeyman musician from Scotland that everybody called Bon. Bon's family moved from Scotland to Australia, and young Bon played in several bands. There was the Spectres, the Valentines, and Fraternity, an outfit that later changed their name to Fang. He was primarily a drummer in the first phase of his professional career. A lot of people don't realize that. None of the bands that Bon performed in made any headway, so Bon had to take a day job shoveling manure at a fertilizer plant before joining yet another band called the Mount Lofty Rangers as the group's lead singer. About a year into his stint with the Mount Lofty Rangers, Bon got into an alcohol-induced confrontation with one of the band members and raced off in a Suzuki motorcycle. Bon crashed his motorcycle and was rushed to the emergency ward where he was in a coma for 3 days, on the verge of death. He did recover from the injury, and he began doing odd jobs at a booking agency where his wife worked, and he met Malcolm and Angus's older brother, George Young. AC/DC had sacked Evans at this point, so they were in the hunt for a new lead singer, and many people told George that they should get Bon Scott. There were immediate issues with Bon that concerned the members of AC/DC, though, and George Young, who was, of course, one of the band's producers. Get this, they thought Bon might be too inexperienced as a frontman, and that at 28 years old, he might be too old. After a late-night jam session, it was obvious that AC/DC had found their new frontman, though, and Bon Scott joined AC/DC in 1974, even though he actually began working for the band as their chauffeur. Bon had exactly what AC/DC was missing to establish themselves on the world stage. He had the character, the sense of humor, of course, the swagger that complemented Angus and Malcolm's intensity, pure intensity. Plus, he could write lyrics, something that AC/DC was in dire need of. With Bon Scott at the center of the electrifying AC/DC shows, the band began to achieve huge notoriety in Australia from 1974 to 76. The next milestone moment for the band was when they caught the attention of legendary music executive Phil Carson, then a principal at Atlantic Records. And Phil told me about this in our interview, and I'm going to share that. As we go into the story, I want to recognize our sponsor, Zenni Eyewear, the glasses that I wear every day. When you get your eyewear from Zenni Optical, you can say goodbye to foggy lenses and glare with Zenni's advanced 2-in-1 anti-fog, anti-reflective coating. This is actually one of the most important features to me. So here's Phil. You signed arguably the biggest rock band of all time, one of my favorites, AC/DC. If you don't mind, set the stage for us when Australian manager Coral Browning walked into your office.
I'll never forget Coral Browning walking into my office. She was drop dead gorgeous and still is a lovely lady, I must say. And I suppose that was part of the reason I gave it the attention that I did. And yes, it was certainly the reason I gave it the attention that I did. Anyway, she had this thing I've never seen before. This was 1975. Videos didn't really exist. You had the old Philips thing, but that was about it. And she'd set up this little opinion-making club tour, and the Australian record company was paying to send them over to try to get signed. She said, well, can I show you the band? I said, you got a picture? She said, no, I'll show you. And she opened this briefcase, and it opened like a screen popped out of the between the roof, the top and the bottom of the case. And it was AC/DC doing A Long Way to the Top. To a show. Back projected by Super 8 with audio onto the screen. And I look at this and I thought, that's amazing. It's a long way to the top if you want to rock and roll. But you don't want to appear too interesting because that tends to put the price up, So she reminded me of exactly what I did. I hit the stop button, and she said, don't you like them? I said, well, yeah, they're okay, but didn't you tell me the Australian label was going to send them over? She said, yeah, they're going to pay to send them over. I said, I'll tell you what, why don't I just sign them right now? And then the label can still send them over, and I'll put them on Backstreet Callers tour, which is a Paul Kozos band that I just signed and was almost ready to be released. So that's what happened. The record company paid for them over. I called Coral's brother, who was the actual manager of the band, Michael Browning. So I called Michael Browning and got him on the phone around about 4:00 in the morning, I think it was. And I made a deal with him. I said, look, I'll sign them now, and I'll give you $25,000 for an album delivered. And I want to have 2 additional albums every year for the next 5 years. So for $25,000, I signed AC/DC to a 15-album deal.
So Bon passed away, and everyone is stunned at that moment. It's a tragedy I'm sure never leaves you.
Yeah.
Everybody still mourns the loss of the fans, right?
Yeah, sure. He was a terrific guy. I really liked Bon. But Brian Johnson came in and did an amazing job. Matt Langer worked him, very well on Back in Black. They made a stunning album, which is now one of the biggest albums of all time. I think by now, actually, between touring sales and record sales, AC/DC is actually the biggest rock band of all time. Because the guys stopped. So there we are.
What a comeback, too, to have that happen and to bring in Brian. I read that Bon said to Angus, if anything ever happens to me, this is your guy, referring to Brian Johnson.
That's true. That's true.
So after the promising success of their album Highway to Hell, AC/DC were on the verge of an international breakthrough. They could feel it. It was really their time. And then tragedy struck in early 1980 when Bon Scott was found dead in the back of a friend's car in London. The band seriously contemplated folding the band altogether when Bon died. And after much deliberation, they decided to look for a new lead singer, as impossible as it seemed. The band believed, though, that Bon would want them to carry on. Even Bon's own father encouraged them to keep going because that is what his son would want them to do. So AC/DC auditioned several candidates for Bon's replacement with no one really nailing it. It was producer Mutt Lange, fresh off his collaboration with the band on Highway to Hell, that suggested they look at ex-Geordie singer Brian Johnson. Angus then recalled that it was Bon himself who first brought up the name Brian Johnson after seeing him perform with Geordie at a concert in England. Bon told Angus and Malcolm, "If anything happens to me, he's your guy." So on March 29th, 1980, AC/DC made Brian Johnson their guy, calling him with the news that he could quit his job as a windshield fitter and join them as their new front man. Brian was the perfect fit to continue the ascension of AC/DC after the loss of Bon Scott. He too has a distinctive voice, an engaging personality, and a passion for classic soul and blues. The band was already under the gun to finish their next record with Mutt Lange at the helm, so they put Brian to work immediately, tasking him to write lyrics for the title track of the new record, which would be called Back in Black. The song and the album were meant to be a tribute to Bon Scott. The band decided on a black cover with just the band's logo. However, they didn't want it to be grief-stricken. Instead, they wanted the album to be a celebration that would capture the spirit of their good friend. Now, originally, Atlantic Records resisted the concept of a black cover, but they eventually relented if the band agreed to have their logo outlined in gray. Now, there's been a lot of speculation about who wrote the lyrics for the songs on Back in Black. There are some who believe Bon Scott did before he passed. And then there's what we know from the members of the band. When Angus and Malcolm asked Brian to write the lyrics for Back in Black, they told him the song was to be a tribute to Bon and that couldn't be morbid, though. Brian apparently really felt the pressure, but he rose to the challenge and he focused on Bon as a dynamic force who would live forever in his music. Back in Black was written in the Bahamas, where the band was recording the Back in Black album. There was actually news of a typhoon that was headed towards the islands, and the band locked Brian in a bungalow with 3 pages of blank paper, I believe a pencil and a candle. The initial lyrics that Brian came up with were related to the incoming storm, which had everybody on edge. "I'm rolling thunder and pouring rain. I'm coming on like a hurricane." And then Brian settled in to reflect on the wild, everlasting power of Bon's legacy, and the words of one of rock's most enduring tracks began to take shape. "Forget the hearse, 'cause I never die. I got 9 lives. Cat's eye abusing every one of them and are running wild." "'Cause I'm back on the track and I'm beating the flack. Nobody's gonna get me on another rack. So look at me now. I'm just making my play. Don't try to push your luck, just get out of my way." Brian admitted that he thought that he was writing what he was writing was mumbo jumbo, since it was just very spontaneous. But when he presented the lyrics to Angus, Malcolm, and Mutt, they felt something inspiring. They could definitely envision Bon's life in Brian's lyric. Famous riff of Back in Black came first, even before the song had a name or the concept to make it a track that honored Bon. Malcolm actually invented the song's magnetic riff. He used to play it as a warm-up exercise. Malcolm almost abandoned the riff altogether because he thought that it was too heavy, but Angus always thought that the riff was too catchy to ignore and encouraged him to keep it in his back pocket, so to speak. It's hard to imagine, you think about it, really hard to imagine, rock and roll without Malcolm's Back in Black riff and Angus's ripping guitar solos, along with Ritchie Blackmore's chord structure for Smoke on the Water. I think Back in Black is one of the first riffs that really most guitarists learn and any self-respecting rocker has to appreciate. AC/DC's Back in Black was a monster, one of the most impactful collection of songs ever recorded. Of course, one of the best sellers. It ranks as the 5th or 6th greatest selling album of all time, depending on what source you look at. However, the chart position of the singles released from the Back in Black LP, they didn't reflect the album's phenomenal popularity. The lead single, You Shook Me All Night Long, that peaked at number 35 on the Billboard Hot 100. We actually covered it in detail in our series, Should Have Been a #1 hit. I'll link to it below so you can watch that if you haven't seen it. Hell's Bells was the 2nd single from Back in Black, and it didn't make the top 40 in any country except for Germany, I think. Oh, and also AC/DC's native land, Australia. Now, the 3rd single was Back in Black. The title track barely made the survey. It stalled at number 37 on the Billboard Hot 100 and went to number 27 on the UK singles chart. Could easily be called a stiff everywhere else, including Down Under, where it did like number 65. But those analytics are just comedic at this point, because Back in Black is not only a household expression and beloved by every little old lady from Pasadena or any other city you can name around the globe. It's bigger than most of the #1 hits from its time, really. Soon as our ears detect that iconic bass snare lead in performed by Cliff Williams and Phil Rudd, we are ready for liftoff into celestial rock and roll nirvana. It's mind-blowing. Demonstrating the song's popularity with more modern analytics, Back in Black received the RIAA's Master Ringtone Sales Award, Gold and Platinum. That was back in 2006. And it reached double platinum status in 2007 from a ringtone. It officially charted on the UK charts 31 years after its release. That was in 2011 to number 27. When AC/DC's music became available on iTunes, they were one of the last holdouts there. Back in Black also reached #1 on the UK rock charts in that same week. The circumstances around Bond's death, of course, very controversial, as we've discussed in features about the history of AC/DC. As you may recall, the cause was officially recorded as a death by misadventure. Now, since the meteoric success of the Back in Black album, there's also been debate about who wrote the lyrics of Back in Black, as well as other tracks on the record, as I mentioned before. There are camps that are convinced that Back in Black was written by Bond for his death, but that conjecture was shot down by Malcolm, who sadly lost in 2017, along with Angus and Brian, who were the 3 centerpieces for all the tracks on Back in Black. Former AC/DC tour manager Ian Jeffrey claims to have a folder in his possession which has 15 songs that Bond wrote for Back in Black, but Angus insists that all of Bond's notebooks were given to Bond's family. I'm sure it's been a very disconcerting to be confronted with rumors about the origin of the music, but Angus has been very honest, stating that he and Malcolm intended to work with Bond on the song for Back in Black, but they sadly didn't have the chance because of his untimely death. Angus relayed that Bond helped Malcolm and him with the intros of the Back in Black songs, Hell's Bells and Have a Drink on Me, when Bond came to the rehearsal room in London, and the brothers asked him to get behind the drum kit and assist on building the melody of those 2 tracks. There doesn't appear to be any sign of the members of AC/DC doing anything but honoring their fallen friend. I mean, they love Bond and always will. Back in Black is a standard in every facet of pop culture, including placement in movies. You know, it's been The School of Rock, Bruno, Megamind, The Muppets, Grudge Match, so many more.
Think we should have rented a bigger car? Hey, wait for me!
There are a few records that have been released in the rock era where pretty much everyone who is into music, even a little, has their own personal connection and experience to this one for sure, this majestic album. Back in Black is one of the crown jewels of rock and roll, and the song is really the centerpiece. I remember when I was over at a friend's house, it was probably around 1983 or so. We were playing Star Wars. I was just a little kid, and I brought over my Jabba the Hutt playset. He had the X-Wing fighter. We're sitting there playing. I heard this loud noise coming out of his older brother's bedroom. It was Back in Black. I was immediately curious. He was in his mid-teens and was always wearing T-shirts that kind of scared me, Molly Hatchet and Led Zeppelin. He had some peach fuzz on his chin. I think he had like 3 hairs. He had a pretty bad mullet as well. I kind of walked over and, poked my head in the door. He was just sitting there rocking out to Back in Black. Remember, he's using a wiffle ball bat for his guitar. And he was lip syncing with his eyes closed, like he was in front of 20,000 screaming fans. And he looked pretty ridiculous. I thought he was the coolest kid I've ever seen. What was this theatrical hard rock sorcery, and how could I get on board? Well, I backed away. I was afraid that he'd see me and beat me to a bloody pulp, be embarrassed. Later, I asked him who the band was, and he, who is this music you were blasting? He said, man, that was Back in Black, AC/DC, they rule. Now, I'd heard a desperate warning from several parents at that point, including my own, that this was devil music. I knew it well. I remember my mom saying that, or maybe it was my older sister, that AC/DC meant Antichrist devil cult. One of my greatest performances, though, I was able to get my friend's brother to record me a copy of the tape. It cost me 2 Atari games, and I promised to be his errand boy for a few weeks. I had to get him drinks and do some of his chores. But I came out the winner, because later I got my own copy of Back in Black, which is, remember, it was taken away by my parents at different times throughout childhood. But we all have our stories. That's my point, of how a certain song or album opened up, a whole world. But AC/DC was really unique because it wasn't just about rebellion or curiosity or something that was considered taboo. I mean, don't get me wrong, it was a little of all those things. But Brian's voice and Angus's guitar on this record, it just has always made me believe I was invincible. Could raise me above any obstacle and help me conquer anything. And really, outside of Van Halen, on the hard rock side anyway, no band has done that with so much power, so much motivation. Back in Black was my gateway to that powerful emotion. Leave us a comment about AC/DC. I want to hear your Back in Black story. How did this record change you? When did you first hear it? I would love to hear those memories. If you like our content, do make sure to subscribe below to our channel. Look us up on Patreon. Help us keep the music alive. It's very important. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth.